Hello and welcome. In this session, we are going to understand what all are the practices that you need to implement so as to benefit from this framework. So, in XP framework, we have around 12 practices. So, the first practice is planning activities or planning games. So planning activities or planning games, they indicate release planning and iteration planning. Release planning is like the release that you are going to do in the customer environment or the test environment, and iteration planning is like in every iteration how much you are going to deliver and what is the schedule for your iteration and what is the schedule for release, and they keep their iterations and releases smaller. So small releases, like the team will be able to focus on small set of requirements and they will be able to come up with an effective or a very good product which will have a desired functionality in it, instead of going ahead with a big bang release and a big product in one go. Yeah, so small releases is the best practice, which is even followed in Scrum framework. And customer test practice, this indicates that the team will show their product, like whatever they are developing in each of the iteration, they will be showing it to the customer every 3 iterations or so, so as to seek feedback from the customer or the business representative, so that they will be able to improve their product. And collective code ownership is one of the practice which is recommended in XP framework. This practice tells that the code base on which the team works, everybody should have access and everybody should have knowledge of complete code. Like if a particular developer has to develop a new functionality or a new feature, then that person should not do any redundant or repetitive code, and he should be able to well aware of which all uh, code snippets they have created, which all classes or packages they have created, and which is the class or package he can use for building that new functionality. So that is how you are going to have a collective code ownership, wherein every developer will be aware of complete code base. Code standards, all the developers, they have to follow all the coding standards, even the naming conventions or even the usage of different variables and creating different methods, classes and stuff. So in everywhere they have to follow coding standards so as to maintain consistency throughout your code base, and so as to keep it clean basically. And sustainable pace, so you are going to plan upfront, like what will be the schedule of your iterations, what will be the schedule of your release, and how many hours team will be spending for building those products or the increments or small part of products every iteration. So for that, we need to plan a sustainable pace. We cannot plan some unrealistic schedule, and we should not make team overwork. So that is going to bring down your team morale, and you won't be able to sustain with that kind of practice. So that is the reason sustainable pace is also one of the best practice which you need to implement so as to boost team morale and so as to have outstanding performance from the team and so as to have quality delivery. Metaphor indicates that you need to have, or you need to represent all the requirements of the product in a very simple language, simple to understand words, and all the team members, the customers, the stakeholders, they should be able to understand the requirements, and they should be able to even resonate with the customer. It should not happen like the business analyst has written some user story or some requirement and he has described it in some way, and developers are not understanding what does that mean. So it should not happen like that. So that is the reason metaphor, it indicates that you need to clearly communicate your requirements to the developers, and even developers should clearly communicate whatever they are understanding from the information that they are getting. Continuous integration, it helps in if you have to do an urgent delivery in between to the customer, to show it to the customer or so, then you should have your product which you have built until then, so that product should be ready. For example, if you have completed 4 iterations, if you have built part 1 in iteration 1, part 2 in iteration 2, part 3 in iteration 3, part 4 in iteration 4, and at the end of iteration 4, if you have to showcase it to the customer, then you should have those 4 parts integrated. So that is the reason you have to practice continuous integration. And there is one more biggest reason for this. Like if you continuously integrate, you will be able to uncover problems or defects early instead of paying more by detecting them at a later date. So continuous integration is one of the important practice that you need to have. Test driven development is the next practice, which indicates that you need to have all the test cases ready right before you start with your code, so that you will be able to quickly test your code right when it is ready. And these test cases are basically automated test cases. So depending on the business requirements, the team, they come up with test cases and they automate those test cases. So immediately when the code is ready, they will run those test cases to immediately test that code. That will be the first level of testing, and there will be more subsequent test phases after that. So, but that is how you are going to test your code then and there. So, test driven development is one of the practice. Pair programming tells us that if one developer is coding, the other developer should sit with that developer, and he should observe if there are any problems, or if there is any coding practice or anything that is not in line with what it should be. And it is promoting the real-time feedback between the developers, so that you will not waste time at a later date by doing a thorough code review and spending a lot of time. Instead of that, they are recommending real-time review of the development. So this is also one of the practice, but most of the development teams, they are not able to practice this particular rule in an effective manner, because it requires 2 developers to sit together, and they will be working on the same code at a time. So there may be possibility of wastage of time, but it also has a benefit. There are actually pros and cons. So the benefit is, like, you will be able to review your code in the real time, and you will not be spending too much time later on to do a thorough code review and come up with recommendations and such and stuff. Simple design, you need to have simple design. The design of the product, the design of your code has to be simple, and each and every developer should be able to easily understand the code, and they should be able to even build the rest of the functionality upon that. So simple design is one of the best practice. And the last best practice is refactoring. Refactoring is basically cleaning up your code or avoiding redundant code, and time to time the team has to review the code to find out if there is any redundancy in the code, or if there is any code which is not being used, or if there is any functionality which is not being used, and you have a few thousands of lines of code for that. So that kind of code should be removed, and you should keep your code base clean. And this terminology, it is known as refactoring, cleaning your code and keeping it clean and simple and understandable. And if you are not doing that, then your technical debt is going to increase. Technical debt means having too much of unclean code is known as technical debt. So you should have zero technical debt. So you should keep on cleaning your code as and when you develop your product. Yeah, so these are the different XP practices which you need to implement so as to benefit from this framework. Yeah, so we'll meet in the next video. Until then, bye.